Welcome to Hello Player, a show for curious people who want an honest look at making a video game. I'm your host, Ava Carr, and in this episode, Charles and I are going to be talking about adding clarity to chaos when designing HyperDot. All right, let's get started. Hey, Charles.
Yo.
Hey.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh, where do we even start?
I'm an artiste, and I need to stop being that.
What? Do you actually feel that way?
No, it's just where we can start is the beginning where I had an original idea of like, oh yes, I'm going to have these things. They're going to be called modifiers. And then there's going to be this area that's called trials for these things, all these different terminologies and words that you'll eventually learn and icons you'll eventually understand.
You did have a lot of icons.
Yes. But I was like, oh, you'll just naturally learn all these things because this is the intent. I want it to be minimal. I don't want to tell you anything. Spoiler alert, that was not a good idea.
Wait, why do you think it wasn't a good idea?
Because no one understood anything.
No one understands you. Yes. No one understood. I remember being like, when I first looked at the game, I loved like the gameplay mechanic and how simple it was to just jump in and play. But then at some point when I was looking at some of the levels, especially when you jumped in for modifiers, remember what I said to you?
You're going to have to remind me.
I said, I want random.
Oh, yes.
Like when the modifiers came about, I was like, I choose random because it took me a couple of minutes to think about which modifier combinations I really wanted. And I was like, I don't wanna.
No, yeah, that was a big problem, especially modifiers. Modifiers was like the first not red herring. The first thing that was like, oh yes, this is a problem. Where I had the original screen was just a grid full of icons.
And this was like version 1, right?
Yeah.
So like the first version right out of college, would you say?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is when I first put in modifiers. I had like a decent handful of modifiers that you can like mess around with.
Yeah, and then just to make sure that if anyone's just joining us right now, what are modifiers in HyperDot?
Yeah, so modifiers are things that change up the gameplay. So you can have players be twice as big, twice as slow, or you can change the arena itself. So you can have a dark arena or an ice arena where you can't stop moving. So tons of different ways that modify how the game actually plays.
Yeah, versus just the simple dodge everything. There's things that have an impact on gameplay.
Yeah, but that first that first problem where it was like, I have all of these icons, learned them, and then I did originally have a better system where on the side, if you did hover over it, then it would say, yes, this is what it does. But it was like, it was a long prose that you had to read.
Yeah. How many icons did you initially have for modifiers?
I think double what was, I think it was like, or like when I first was starting, there was like 20 different icons.
Yeah.
But
okay.
There were 10 different modifiers actually, because there were icons for leaving it normal. Like leaving it so that, this is what this would normally look like.
And see, the UI on it originally too was beautiful, right? It was the bizarre kind of like functionality of like that moment of, oh God, there's a lot of options here for how to change my gameplay. And for me, that was like strangely overwhelming right away.
No, yeah. And that is still like, that was still up leading until like in the last year. Where it was just like, this modifier screen is just intense because it's just a bunch of icons and a bunch of words and a bunch of things going on at one time, and you have to deal with what is this icon? What does this I mean? I don't know what that means. Or like, oh, there are 3 different circles that look the same.
Yeah.
How am I supposed to actually illustrate that this? Oh yeah,
one circle was bigger than the other one and such. But yeah,
but like even then, there were like 3 different icons that had big circles. It's just one was filled in or one was not. And then one was like a dashed outline. And then nobody knew what any of those things meant. So yeah, it was a lot of trying to figure out, well, how do I actually make it so that people can understand and want to use this?
Was there a moment that you were like, oh God, Yeah. What happened?
Well, there were a couple of moments where that happened. It's just none of those moments actually broke through and it was like, okay, I'm going to actually go back and fix this until way late. There was a couple of moments where, like, when I first saw people play and it was like, oh, there's a lot of things going on the screen. At that point, I was like, yeah, well, I'm just testing, so, I'll just leave it in there for now. Yeah. But eventually, I put in too many modifiers for that original screen to
I feel like
fit.
It was a 6x5 grid at some point.
Yes.
There were so many modifiers, and you still also had the original like normal mode and hard mode at that time too.
Yes.
So it was like normal mode, hard mode, and then a screen full of modifiers for how you could essentially like impact or change the gameplay.
Yeah. And it was at that point where I was like, oh man, I actually might have to go back in here and change it. And then I found like a really quick fix where I just made everything really small. And I was like, yeah, that works. So then I just was like, yeah, I'll put this off even further. And it wasn't, again, until that like a year ago where I was like, oh, I really should probably go back in here and update this because it was pretty bad.
So, like, version 2 came along at some point, right? Which was, I think, in my opinion, like, at the beginning of the conversation, I just remember, like, options. Mm-hmm. Lots and lots of options. And when I had talked to you, you were very specifically like, I want players to be able to have so many different options to change their gameplay and gameplay style. Could you talk to me a little bit about that?
That one was I think it was at that point we had signed and we were like collaborating, working together and whatnot. But I had I had the design or like the design pillar of flexibility. Mm-hmm. And what that meant to me was I want to make it so that you can change this game. And that is your main, like, that is one of the main things that you can do. It's just, I want to have dark mode on, have power-ups on, and us be super fast and all these other things.
It almost sounds like you were building the level editor in a way.
Yeah, slightly.
Like, is that where your mind was at? Like, you want players to be able to, like, thinking about flexibility, you want players to be able to do whatever they want in the game.
Yes.
Okay.
I was inspired heavily by Towerfall. And all of the different ways that you can change how the game is and such. Mm-hmm. So that's where I originally was like, oh, I'll just use icons and things like that. But one of the things that Towerfall does is that it also has like words and things that pop up and, helpful quality of life things that I did not include because I wanted it minimal.
It's still minimal.
Yes, it is still minimal. It is.
You gotta give yourself some credit there.
But yeah, so like 2.0 was like a combination of what it ultimately should have been and like what I really wanted and I was like latching on to, where it was instead of having a whole bunch of like modifiers and things like that, and then you can go in, choose a pattern, and then go and choose a bunch of modifiers and then start playing. It was, here's a level that has a bunch of modifiers, but then there are modifier sets. See, this is already getting complicated.
Oh my God, it's already getting complicated.
Yeah. So there are modifier sets where you can have all these preset modifiers. So you can click, oh, I want the dark
Oh my God.
Power up, whatever. See, you see how I shouldn't have been the artiste. I should have just been like, no, stop being all like, I'm super pretentious. I need you to understand. But it was like, it was bad. It was pretty bad.
Oh my gosh. What? So I remember you and I, when we sat down and we were like, okay, is this something that we want to tackle together? Mm-hmm. Like, do we want to talk about this? And if so, do we want to collab on this at all? There was an early phase when we were talking about kind of like the way that, like essentially the information architecture, which is just the way that the information is presented. Mm-hmm. There's a big conflict, and I cannot for the life of me exactly remember what it was, but we like butted heads on something.
Yeah. So I do remember this. So like all of this stuff was stemming from, there was this one main problem that I hadn't actually like touched at all for 2 years, I think. And that was, what do I call these different modes inside of the game?
Yes.
And
there was normal mode, there was hard mode, and then there was modifiers.
yes. And then there was, and that was just the free play / multiplayer version of the game. And then there was the single player version of the game. And that,
I'm already confused again.
I know,
and I know the game.
And you know the game. And that was where I was like, okay, so my original intent was there's trials and then there's free play. And in trials is the single player campaign. That's where you go through a bunch of trials and you finish up challenges and whatnot. And then there's free play, which is the single player / multiplayer version of the game where you're going for high scores and things. And then you can change all the modifiers and do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And like, that was like the fundamental me being the biggest artist thing ever, where it's like, no, you'll understand what trials means because I named it trials. I don't know why. But like that wasn't a thing that I tested because whenever I play tested it or I was like, hey, somebody come over here so you can try this out. It was just me saying, hey, can you try this thing out? And I would quickly go into trials and then be like, yeah, try out this level.
Yeah, and you also quickly, a couple of times when you wanted to show off modifiers, you picked your favorite modifiers as well, and then you just showed it. But most of the time, the controller was taken from, or like you would guide the player
I would try and guide and stuff like that. But like, as soon as I let go, and I was like, okay, now you can go. It was chaos.
Yeah. Is that really it? It was just like the multiplayer plus, oh God, I don't even know. Yeah. So yeah, it was just kind of like figuring out what your intent was and then adding it, like figuring out how to share that with players.
Yeah.
But what was your actual intent? Like, how did you want people to play the game? And then I think ultimately that'll translate to where we kind of went with it.
Yeah. So ultimately, the way that I wanted to play it was with that flexibility in mind, to be able to change everything and do whatnot. But actually, Matt Gravel from Graphic kind of put it really plainly, and I was like, oh, I am doing this. I was seeing it from like a programmer's perspective where, oh, okay, we're at the main menu, and then I want people to be able to like do the arcade mode of the game. So they go into free play, but then if they want to play multiplayer or if they want to play single player, it doesn't matter because they just go to free play. It's all inside of this one thing. Yeah. And then at that point you can go and do whatever you want to do.
And I think the biggest conflict was my opinion very much so differed from that, which was that I felt like there were so many choices and none were actually being presented to me of what I could or what possibilities are that I should be doing.
Yes.
And I can't believe now talking about it that that's all that it was.
Oh, yeah.
Like, because it was like 2 or 3 months worth of us, going back and forth with a bunch of different changes. Yeah. And at the end of the day, that's really all it was.
Yeah.
But it was so, like, at the root of it, trying to have that communication of, okay, well, what's going to work for players? Yeah. And it was hard.
Yeah. It was tough. And it was like, yes, I was, being super artistic and all this stuff. Artistic. But really, I knew in the back of my mind, like, I should really do single player, multiplayer. I should like spell out what all these modifiers are and all these things, like to make it easier.
I remember advocating for single player and multiplayer, and I don't like I felt like there was so much pushback on single player, multiplayer, and then I was like, what's free play? How do I actually engage with free play?
Yeah, because like if you're just picking up the game, you use this example. If you just pick up the game and you're like, I want to play multiplayer. Yeah. Where do you go? You go to the correct answer is you go to Freeplay and then you can start doing multiplayer things. But you wouldn't know to do that.
Yeah, I think the average player wouldn't really understand right away what Freeplay was, and that it's not in it's not in their vocab immediately.
Right. Because it's not. They're like I don't actually explain that regardless. It's just something you're gonna have to pick up on, just by playing and such. So that's where, like, I knew in the back of my mind, like, I should really do this. I have this like feeling that I should really be doing this. But
yeah, I remember even also bringing like all of this UI over to you and being like, "Look, Mario Kart. Like, let's talk a lot about all of these different like organization and UX options." And you were still like not sold. And I remember specifically on multiplayer, like you were not sold on making levels out of multiplayer for the longest time.
Yeah.
Talk to me about what that felt like. To me, it just feels a lot like almost refining and clarity and some editing, but also like I'm curious how you felt in that moment.
Sure. Yeah. It was, and this is something that I've found that I do and I need to get better at, is that I got really defensive about like, oh, but this is my original idea. I don't want to not do what my original idea was. I want to have it so that like my original intent is intact and it was, it was always good. I guess. I don't know. So like there was a lot of me just being like, no, I really don't want to do that. Some of it was actually warranted. One thing that I do have a smaller critique about like the Mario Kart interface is that in order to have more people play with you, you have to back out all the way back to the menu.
Not good.
Yeah, and then
I
go
agree
to
with
the
you.
And that was like, so anything that I could latch onto and be like, oh, I don't like that, and then I would just like say, oh yeah, I don't like that. See,
see, you can't do this. No, no,
please don't take my ideas away.
No, please don't take the 25, 26 modifiers away.
Yeah.
No, I understand.
But yeah, it was like a lot of me just trying to find those small imperfections in whatever examples and such, and then being super defensive. And I've noticed that I tend to do that whenever it comes to like criticism or things like that, where I just become really like, no.
It's hard though. Like when it's the thing that you're making, I get that. Like as someone, who designs things and then puts them out in the world, I get it. I get it.
But that's where I eventually was kind of getting over myself and was like, no, listen, it makes more sense to have it so that people can actually play the game and understand and enjoy these things versus I don't even know. I guess a small subset of people will go through all of this and then start talking game speak.
Yeah.
Not game speak like Oddworld, but like game speak where it's like, oh yes, I'll totally get the blingleberries of these.
The blingleberries and the derpleborps.
Yes. Oh yeah, and we need 500
serpers.
Yeah, all these things. And it's like, what? No one understands what you're talking about except for the small few people who've gone through and was like, yes, I'll deal with all of this in order to understand it.
Yeah, so the big things were definitely trials, which eventually became single player mode.
Yes.
And instead of being called trials, they turned into levels.
Yes.
And single player and multiplayer, right? So since there were, and then later on the addition of level editor. And I think even until this day, it's kind of funny that moment that you had. What was it? Maybe just like at the end, towards the final moments, right?
Yeah.
Before you sent it off to like final lot check, insert, and all of these things, you looked at me and looked over at my desk and was like, "All right, here's the real question: levels or trials?" And I was like, "Charles, you know what each of the like. I mean, you could do either. So let's talk about it. Like, what do you think?"
Yeah, and that was like that moment. I knew the answer when I was saying it,
What did you want from me then? What were you asking me for?
I don't know. There's multiple times throughout the development of HyperDot where I knew the answer, but then I just wanted to ask somebody else to say, like, do you think that it should be levels or trials?
You change your voice too when you ask, and you know, you have a very straight face when you ask, and you have an idea of what the answer actually is that you want.
Yeah, it's the answer that I don't want it to be, but I know it should be that. Where I was like, well, no, duh, it should be levels, because everywhere else I say level. I say custom levels. I say levels inside. There's level select inside of multiplayer.
Mm-hmm.
There's like all of these other places. I say these are levels, and then that was like the last bit of my artiste kind of thing statements, and being like, oh yes, this is going to be all these vernacular and whatnot. Where I was like, yes, okay, it should be levels. And then you said levels, and I was like, yeah, it probably should be levels. Yeah,
and funny enough, there's still trials sprinkled everywhere, so I feel like you didn't actually make a decision.
I mean, so this was more, oh, I forgot.
I know.
Whoops. So there are still some like places where I need to go back and change it from, like, if you beat a level, it says press A to do next trial. I'm like, crap, I forgot.
I was playing a build this morning and was like, wait, this is a trial.
Yeah.
It says next trials.
Yeah, I should go back and fix it. But there's other bugs and things I gotta do for prep and things. So yeah.
All right. Well, in terms of adding clarity, is there anything that you'd like to share with the listeners of, going through this process and all the feelings and emotions that are involved with it?
Yeah. I mean, I'm guessing that most people are like, really? What are you really talking about? The names that the thing you're trying to like communicate and whatnot.
So important.
Yeah, it's really important, and it's really important just to be able to understand what's going on and such. But like, I don't want to say that the artistic intent of the game like had no weight, or it was like, stop getting, get over yourself and things like that. But it was trying to understand from a person who never has interacted with the game and being like, oh, they don't know what Freeplay means. They don't know what trials means. They don't know what modifiers means. They don't know what any of this stuff means.
Like none of it.
Yeah. And then like to make it so that, or I should be making it so that it's easier for people to understand what's going on. So adding in the name of the modifier next to an icon, that's an easy fix. But the minimalist design principle was the thing that I was like, I don't want to make it so that there's a whole bunch
longer.
of it's longer. It's no longer minimal. But I'm like, I'm taking that to the extreme, and I'm taking it to the fault of the game. And that is something where you can have your principles and your philosophies and things like that, but always consider what it is that the person who doesn't actually understand what's going on, or who's playing this for the first time, how are they going to feel about this stuff?
Mm-hmm. And I would add that the easiest way for me when I was just chatting with you is like, let's test it.
Yeah.
So the easiest thing to do is learn from our time together talking, and don't be afraid to just like throw things out and test it.
Yeah.
Or else sometimes you just sit there and argue, or not really argue, but you like talk about it for just maybe a little too long.
Yep.
And never come to a decision. And instead you can just send it out into the world.
Yeah, you can
and
just
let people test it. And then you'll be like, okay, this worked better.
Yep.
And then there's some evidence there, and you kind of go, yeah, it did work better. Let's move in that direction.
Yeah, definitely. And if you do have those like defensive tendencies, it's okay to like, oh, I have this defensive tendency, but you should recognize that you're like, oh, wait, maybe I should actually listen.
Yeah, take some time.
Yeah.
Go watch an episode of something.
Yeah.
Because I feel you.
Yeah.
Especially when it's like your baby.
Yeah. I'm like, no, I want it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. That's a wrap for the episode. You can continue the conversation with us and the Hello Player community at discord.gg/glitch. And don't forget to subscribe to Hello Player on your favorite podcast app. Hello Player is produced by me, Ava Carr, Holly Harrison, Ben Hansen of MinMax, with music done by none other than Charles McGregor. Thanks for listening again, and see you next time.